This PowerPoint discusses some essential principles of economics and explores some common fallacies accepted by the general public but recognized as fake by the sound economic thinker. The first and probably most important axiom in economics is that all choices have a cost. It is in the very nature of choice that something was not chosen. Otherwise, it would not have been a choice. The most valuable foregone alternative, that is, the value of the thing that was not chosen, is that choice's opportunity cost. Choice is necessary because we live in a world of scarcity. When something is scarce, it is both desirable and limited in supply. In other words, unlimited wants meet limited resources. Another way of expressing this axiom is by the famous economics acronym TANSTAFL, which means there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Oftentimes people forget to apply the most important axiom when recommending government implementation of some economic mandate or policy. Environmentalists and politicians, for example, often tout the benefits of ethanol production without a full awareness of its costs. Ethanol supporters claim that this corn-based fuel both saves money and the environment because it requires no oil to manufacture. What they conveniently forget is the full cost of burning corn for fuel. These costs include the energy consumed in producing and transporting ethanol, which is much greater than that for gasoline. These costs also include the pollution generated by the production of ethanol and by burning ethanol itself, as well as the huge amounts of water needed both to grow the corn from which ethanol is made and to produce ethanol. In addition, ethanol is highly corrosive to a vehicle's fuel system, requiring special, more costly materials, and the fuel has a lower octane and shorter shelf life than conventional gasoline. When all these costs are considered, ethanol is a far more costly alternative than petroleum or gasoline. Ethanol is only produced and used because governments require its use and subsidize its production. Without these mandates and government subsidies, ethanol would end up not being produced at all. Ethanol production benefits only a small group of corn farmers and ethanol producers, and it does so at great expense to everyone else. Another central axiom of economics is that incentives matter. In other words, people do things for reasons. If they did not have an end or reason for doing something, they would not do it. Some examples of incentives might include wealth, fame, acceptance, religious salvation, or simply power over others. Typically, none of these incentives exist in isolation from the others. We often do things for multiple reasons, often lying even to ourselves about what the real motives or incentives are. Incentives are often difficult to sort out. We like to think, for example, that our public officials are motivated by the desire to serve us and do good. Many perhaps sincerely believe that this is their motive, at least when they first decide to get involved in politics. Later, they often find the perks and power that come with public office overwhelm them. They find themselves rationalizing less than public-spirited behavior. And oftentimes politicians who put public interest first find themselves isolated by more self-interested colleagues and abandoned by wealthy supporters whom they need to win election. Building a new bridge across a river using government money often gains the politician who pushed for the project praise, but spending money to maintain that bridge is far less glamorous and unlikely to gain anyone's recognition or praise. What incentive does the politician or government bureaucrat have to push for such spending? None, until the bridge collapses, and then they point the finger or blame at others. When the bridge pictured above collapsed in the Mississippi River several years ago, there was much discussion about who was to blame, but ultimately no one was held responsible, and the taxpayers picked up the costs of both rebuilding the bridge and paying off the numerous lawsuits that resulted from the collapse. Had the bridge been privately owned, there would have been no question of who picks up the cost and the failure. That would be the owner. The owner, therefore, would have a much greater incentive to maintain the bridge than unaccountable politicians and government bureaucrats. The third axiom is people serve their self-interest. Self-interest is often confused with greed, but the two are not the same. Self-interest means greed only if you're a greedy person. Mother Teresa here, to the right, and Microsoft founder Bill Gates, to the left, were both self-interested, though perhaps their interests were quite different. Mother Teresa's interests focused around fulfilling a religious mission, while Bill Gates' interests focused on developing and marketing his company's software. It might be noted that both were altruistic, and that on some level each found personal satisfaction or salvation in making the world a better place, and both were selfish or greedy and wanting to gain some personal reward for their effort, whether material or spiritual. We should probably be slow to judge the motives of either. Value is subjective. Something that is subjective is impossible to measure, as opposed to something that is objective and can be measured. I can say, for example, that the Picasso sculpture in downtown Chicago weighs 2 tons. So long as we agree on the definition of what a ton is, I can check this statement against the definition and prove the statement is true or false. On the other hand, I can say that the Picasso sculpture is worth $10 million, but I cannot prove this unless someone actually pays that much for it. And even if someone does buy the sculpture for $10 million, it is only true that for that particular buyer that the sculpture is worth that much. Actually, for that person, the Picasso must be worth more than $10 million. Otherwise, why would they exchange $10 million for it? No one voluntarily exchanges things of equal value, since there would be no point in making such an exchange. My situation can only be improved by exchanging things of lesser value for things of greater value. And that value, again, is entirely in the eyes of the person doing the valuing. Not only does a good's value differ from person to person, but from unit to unit held by the same person. The utility of the last unit available is less valuable than the one prior to it. The man who is dying of thirst, for example, will value the first glass of water offered him more highly than the second or the third offered. Similarly, a man will value his first dollar, particularly if that is his only one, more than his millionth dollar. This is why very rich people often give away so much money. The good feeling they get from supporting a cause they believe in outweighs the value of the money they have given up, if held or used for other reasons. Philanthropists, therefore, are made better off as a result of giving away their money. Another example of this principle of marginal utility can be seen in the Hope Diamond. The Hope Diamond, pictured here, is not expensive because of any particular use the diamond can be put to, but rather because it is so unique and rare. Many people value possessing something rare, and very wealthy people are willing to give up their less valuable excess money in order to attain a rare or one-of-a-kind item. For a poor homeless person, the diamond would not have much value at all, except to the extent that he or she could exchange it for more valuable money. On the flip side, water is not relatively inexpensive because it is useless, quite the contrary, but rather because there is so much of it readily available. In some parts of the world, water is difficult to attain, and therefore each unit has more value than in places where water is plentiful. The subjective and marginal value of things is what makes trade beneficial. You should note that in economics, the term margin or marginal means additional, or relating to a change in conditions. We make all decisions based on changing conditions. If water becomes more scarce, for example, we value it differently than when it is abundant. As resources are depleted, or even just expected to be depleted, these resources become more highly valued. If new technology, on the other hand, makes things more abundant, then all other things being the same, the good's relative value falls. While the marginal or additional benefits decline with each additional unit acquired, the marginal costs typically increase. For example, an athlete might decide to spend an hour practicing with the expectation that this single hour will bring a certain amount of improvement in skill. He must give up some other possible activity to make time for that hour of practice. Since this improvement in skill is of greater value to him than alternative values that could be gained with this hour, he decides to spend the hour practicing. A second hour spent practicing may bring some additional or marginal improvement in skill, but not as great a marginal improvement as the first hour, and he will have to sacrifice still more of some other valued activity to make time for that second hour of practice. A third hour of practice will bring still more improvement in skill, but the margin will be smaller than the second hour's return on invested time, and making time for this third hour will require giving up something else that he valued even more highly than what he gave up initially to make time for that first or second hour of practice. At some point, as the marginal gain in skill gets smaller and smaller with each passing hour of practice, and the marginal cost measured in terms of something else he had to give up gets greater, he decides that further practice is no longer worth doing and he stops. The opportunity cost per unit of improvement is too high to merit continuing. We all make these kinds of decisions every day. Oftentimes people make poor decisions by not fully considering marginal costs and benefits. An athlete might spend so much time practicing that he becomes burned out, or he flunks classes and becomes ineligible to play. A person may throw good money after bad by persisting in spending money on an investment that has already failed in the vain hope that the losses can somehow be reversed without considering what might be accomplished by simply admitting failure and using the money elsewhere. People who play slot machines are often victims of this kind of non-marginal thinking as well. They obsess over previous losses and continue to pour money into the machine, often spending money they cannot afford to lose. Our time has value. Since we are all mortal, time is scarce. Having to wait wastes or consumes our valuable time. Therefore, people are unwilling to wait unless compensating value of some kind is offered in return, or if they are forced to wait by circumstances. The price a person puts on having to wait for something is called that person's time preference. High time preference means I place great value on time and demand greater future reward in order to get me to wait. These people with high time preference tend to live in the present and tend to consume rather than save. A person with an infinite time preference would consume the instant he had the good and would be unwilling to wait for anything or unwilling to save anything for the future. Indeed, such a person would likely not perceive of the future and live only in the present. Such people tend to be economic failures because they're incapable of investing or thinking ahead. Low time preference means I place less value on time and I'm more willing to wait for something. A low time preference person would be more inclined to save and invest for the future, rather than consume wealth in the present. These people tend to accumulate wealth and are usually more successful economically. Finally, voluntary trade benefits all who engage in it. If trade were not mutually beneficial, people would not trade. It is that simple. Each side of a trade benefits from trade because each side values things differently. When I sell something, I am saying I value the money I receive more than the good I gave up. When I buy something, I am saying I value the good I am receiving more than the money I am giving up. Yet some people argue that trade should be restricted, either because they feel that the good we wish to trade for is bad for us, or because they wish us to be forced to trade with them rather than with somebody else. In either case, such people are sticking their nose into someone else's business, and thereby making that other person worse off. Let us now examine some common fallacies or obstacles to clear economic thinking. The above Simpson cartoon is an example of what is called a non sequitur, or Latin for it does not follow. Non sequiturs are illogical or do not make sense. The following slides explain the source of economic non sequiturs, many of which are believed by most people, and even some professional economists. Many of the problems we face today are the result of non sequitur thinking that leads to irrational and destructive results. The broken window fallacy, first popularized by the French economist Frédéric Bastiat and later by American Henry Hazlitt, is based on the common belief that good can come of destruction. Bastiat and later Hazlitt illustrated the concept through the tale of a boy who broke a shopkeeper's window, arguing that he had just done a good deed by creating a job for the window repairman. The broken window fallacy is the most prevalent and destructive of the economic fallacies. It can be seen in just about every government policy. Many people believe, for example, that wars help the economy. This is so obviously false that even a small child can understand why. Wars kill and destroy. And how can killing people and destroying things they make us better off? Destroying people and things denies you the use of those things and the production of those people. The source of this fallacy is a failure to consider opportunity cost. Remember axiom number 1. Wars do, of course, give some people work and generate enormous profits for arms manufacturers. Wars also give more power and build the fame of politicians, which may explain why these armchair warriors often are eager for war. The benefits to these few, however, come at great cost to everyone else. People also commonly confuse cause and effect. This is called the post hoc fallacy. Just because two events occur together does not mean the first caused the second. The sun did not come up because the rooster crowed, no matter which order they came. Government has expanded during the 20th century, and the automobile was invented. Did the government's expansion lead to the invention of the automobile? Doubtful. The Great Depression began with the stock market crash of 1929. Did the market crash cause the depression, or was it the other way around? Likely. One must be cautious, however, using inductive reasoning to claim a cause and effect relationship. One must have a logical theory arrived at deductively before one can draw conclusions about cause and effect. A third common error in thinking is confusing money with real wealth. While it is true that money can often be exchanged for real wealth, which is what makes money valuable, Simply printing up small rectangular pieces of paper with dead politicians' pictures on them never made any society wealthier. The printing up of money by politicians and central banks, in fact, makes most people poorer, as it represents a form of legalized counterfeiting. It is used by unproductive members of the community, the parasitic counterfeiter, to steal the wealth from productive members of the community. Finally, one should not confuse government with either God or Santa Claus. Governments cannot override economic law with legislation any more than they can override the laws of physics. Economic law applies at all times and everywhere, regardless of politics. Gullible voters often fall for political promises to turn stones into bread or water into wine. This New York City neighborhood is where rent controls limited what landlords could charge. Tenants were told they can get cheap apartments this way. The law meant to curry favor with voting tenants resulted in many building owners abandoning their property or even resorting to arson to protect their financial interests. Tenants got cheap apartments all right, but at the cost of steadily deteriorating buildings. Again, Tonstoffel, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And next to bombing, rent control is the most effective way to destroy a city.